Sometimes the best beginnings come dressed as accidents, but the truest endings are always the ones we choose. Ruby never planned to crash a millionaire's wedding. She was only here because her roommate begged her to tag along. Free food, open bar, and rich people acting weird, Zoe had said, waving 2 last-minute RSVP cards. Come on, it'll be fun. But now, standing at the edge of a ballroom that looked like a royal cathedral had collided with a jewelry store, Ruby felt entirely out of place. Her dress was casual, her heels were borrowed, her confidence non-existent. Somehow, in the chaos of valet drop-offs, Zoe getting whisked away by a flirtatious groomsman and an overly enthusiastic planner who mistook her for someone else, Ruby found herself led into the VIP suite just minutes before the ceremony. "I think you've got the wrong person," she tried to say, but the woman in a headset shoved a glass of champagne in her hand and closed the door behind her. And that's when he walked in. Tall, sharp, impossibly handsome. The tuxedo fit his body like it was stitched on him. His dark eyes scanned the room, then locked on her. "You're here," he said. Ruby blinked. I didn't think you'd show," he added, voice low, unreadable. She opened her mouth to correct him, but her tongue tied itself in knots. He took a step closer. "You look different from the photos, but honestly, better." Before she could speak, a man burst through the door, pale and frantic. "She's gone," he gasped. "The bride she ran, left a note and everything." Ruby turned to leave. The groom stepped forward. "No," he said suddenly. "The wedding goes on." "What?" the assistant asked, stunned. His eyes stayed on Ruby. "You," he said, "you're marrying me." Her jaw dropped. "I'm sorry, what? I'm not the bride." "You are now." The marriage certificate was signed before Ruby fully processed what had happened. A blur of voices, flashing cameras, someone handing her a bouquet, a strange weight settling on her left ring finger. Afterward, she sat silently in the back seat of a luxury Blacktown car, her fingers clutching the hem of her borrowed dress. Beside her sat the man she had just married in front of 300 guests, a string quartet, and an entire wedding team who had no idea the bride had changed an hour before the ceremony. His name was Ethan Carter, tech entrepreneur, millionaire before 30, the kind of man who appeared in Forbes lists and walked red carpets with investors instead of actors, the kind of man who never looked unprepared, and yet tonight he had looked straight into her eyes and made a decision so reckless that even Ruby questioned if it had really happened. She snuck a glance at him. He sat straight, phone in hand, suit flawless, not a bead of sweat on his brow. "This was a mistake," she whispered, mostly to herself. Ethan spoke without looking up. "Possibly, but it's one that saves my company from a PR disaster and my family from humiliation." "I don't even know you." "Likewise, yet here we are." She stared ahead again. The city lights blurred outside the window as they drove through Manhattan. "I didn't say yes. You didn't say no either, and legally that's all the state cared about." She turned to face him. "Are you always this casual about life-altering decisions?" "Only when the other options are worse." He finally looked at her. His expression was unreadable, controlled, but his eyes betrayed something else, exhaustion, maybe regret, maybe both. "You didn't have to choose me," she said. "You were the only one in the room not paid to lie to me." Silence filled the car after that. When they arrived at the penthouse, Ruby followed Ethan wordlessly into a space that felt more like a high-end art gallery than a home. Glass walls, marble floors, a grand piano that looked untouched, the kind of place where you didn't sit unless someone told you it was okay. She stood awkwardly near the entrance while Ethan poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter. "You want something?" he asked. "Answers." He nodded once, took a sip, and leaned against the counter. "My company is preparing for a massive merger. My shareholders demanded I clean up my image. That meant a wedding, a stable public life, The woman I was supposed to marry backed out at the last minute. If word got out, it would tank our valuation overnight. Investors would panic. Rivals would circle. So you thought, sure, random girl standing near me, let's get married. You were already in the dress, people were watching, and you didn't run. I froze. Same thing. Ruby stared at him, stunned by his detachment. Or maybe it was control. She couldn't tell. You can't possibly expect this to be real. No, it doesn't need to be. We file for annulment quietly, after a few months, clean exit. I compensate you generously for the inconvenience. You go back to your life. I keep my company stable. Is that how you always solve your problems? With contracts and payouts? Ethan set down his glass. I don't usually have problems. They stood in silence again. Finally, Ruby stepped away from the door and sat at the edge of the ivory couch, still tense. My name's Ruby Fields, by the way. He blinked. I know. You do? Security identified you right after the ceremony. Zoe Phillips's roommate, freelance content writer, lives in Queens, no criminal record, credit score slightly below national average, likes dogs, dislikes bad coffee. You follow a YouTube channel called The History of Forgotten Sandwiches. Her mouth dropped. You're a lunatic. He shrugged. I'm thorough. Ruby stood. This is insane. It is, but it will work, because no one questions a love story that ends with a wedding. Ruby crossed her arms. You picked the wrong girl, Ethan. He looked straight at her. Maybe, or maybe I finally picked someone real. She didn't know how to respond to that, and for once, neither did he. Later that night, she curled up on the edge of a guest room bed, with white sheets softer than anything she'd ever touched. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, wondering what twist of the universe had landed her in this stranger's world. Down the hall, Ethan stood at the window, untouched drink in hand, staring out over a city that didn't sleep. He wasn't sure what he had done tonight. All he knew was that Ruby hadn't said yes out of desire or ambition. She had said yes because in that moment, she didn't want to walk away from something that might just be bigger than both of them. Ruby woke up the next morning and for a brief, blissful moment, forgot everything. The warm bed, the silence, the view of the city through tall windows. It almost felt like she was in a dream. Then she saw the dress tossed over a chair, the diamond band still on her finger, and the memory came rushing back. She was married. To a stranger, a very rich, very emotionally unavailable stranger. She got up and tiptoed into the hallway. The penthouse was quiet. Polished floors, modern art, glass walls, everything screamed power and silence. She wandered toward the kitchen, hoping to find coffee, or better yet, a trap door that would return her to her regular life. Instead, she found Ethan. He was already dressed in a crisp navy suit, sipping coffee and scrolling through his tablet. His tie was perfect. His posture was military, not a hair out of place. Morning, he said without looking up. Ruby blinked. Do you sleep in a suit? He finally looked up. I had a video meeting at 7. She pulled a mug from the counter and poured herself coffee. I had a dream that none of this was real. Sorry to disappoint. She took a sip, then winced. This is awful. It's Ethiopian, hand-roasted. Still tastes like regret. He cracked the smallest smile. She leaned on the counter. So what happens now? Ethan set down his tablet. You'll move in here officially. My assistant will coordinate with you for wardrobe, media coaching, event schedules. We'll need a few public appearances to sell the story. I don't do fake well. You did fine yesterday. I was in shock. That helps sometimes. She narrowed her eyes. And after all this, after your investors are satisfied, then what? Then we part ways. Ruby studied him. He said it so easily, as if marriage was just another checkbox on his quarterly report. That afternoon she met his team, PR director, legal advisor, personal assistant, all of them professional, polished, and slightly suspicious. They briefed her on what to say, what not to say, and how to act like she was the love of Ethan Carter's life. "It'll be simple," the PR woman assured her. "You two just have to look like you've been together for years, like you've survived something. People love that." "Right," Ruby replied dryly. "Nothing screams romantic survival like a surprise wedding." The assistant, Caleb, handed her a tablet. "Here's your calendar. 2 charity galas, 1 tech conference, and a dinner with his board. Try to smile." Ruby scrolled through the schedule. "And what exactly does Ethan do during all this?" Caleb raised an eyebrow. "What he always does. Run empires." That night they attended their first public event together. Ruby wore a designer gown that made her feel like someone else. Ethan looked like he belonged to the pages of a magazine. They smiled. They held hands. They answered questions with rehearsed charm. But when the cameras were off, the space between them returned. In the car ride home, Ruby stared out the window. "You know," she said quietly, "this could have been a beautiful story." "What do you mean?" 2 strangers, 1 accidental wedding, a wild twist that turns into something real. Ethan didn't respond for a long time. Then he said, "This isn't a story, Ruby. It's strategy." She laughed softly. "You really don't believe in happy accidents, do you?" "No, I believe in leverage." The next morning, the gossip blogs exploded. Photos of their wedding, snippets from the gala, speculation about Ruby's identity. Some called it romantic, others called it suspicious. One headline read, "From nobody to Mrs. Carter, who is Ethan's mystery bride?" Ruby scrolled through the comments. Some were kind, most were not. Gold digger, faker, opportunist. She closed the laptop, her stomach twisting. Ethan walked into the room a moment later. "You knew this would happen," she said. "Yes. You let them attack me. I didn't write the articles." "But you didn't protect me either." He paused. "You said you didn't care what people thought." "That was before they thought I slept my way into your world." He looked at her, and for a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. "This is temporary," he said. "Ignore the noise." She stared at him, then stepped back. "I might be temporary," she said, "but I'm still a person. You don't get to erase that." He didn't follow her when she left the room. And for the first time since their absurd marriage began, Ruby realized something far worse than the headlines. She was starting to care. The days that followed were filled with appearances, photos, and curated smiles. Ruby walked beside Ethan like a well-dressed shadow, posing for the cameras, nodding politely at socialites who greeted her with overly sweet smiles and eyes full of judgment. She learned how to respond when someone said, "You're glowing," in a tone that really meant, "How much did he pay you?" She learned how to lace her fingers through Ethan's in public and keep the smile from fading when he dropped her hand the moment they were out of view. But what surprised her most was how Ethan changed when no one was looking. One night, after a charity event that lasted far too long, they returned to the penthouse. Ruby kicked off her heels with a sigh and sat down on the couch, rubbing her feet. Ethan walked in behind her, tossing his tie on the armchair. "Do your feet hurt after every event?" he asked without looking at her. "Only when I have to stand next to you and pretend I'm having fun." He smirked and disappeared into the kitchen. Moments later, he returned with a small box. Without a word, he set it in front of her and walked away. Inside were a pair of memory foam slippers. She stared at them, then looked at the hallway he had vanished into. The next morning, she found him in the kitchen, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. One was hers, the ugly one she had picked out at a tourist shop 2 days before. He had mocked it for being bright yellow with a cartoon avocado on the side. Yet here it was, filled and waiting for her. You made coffee? She asked. He shrugged. You said mine tasted like burnt taxes. She took a sip and blinked. This is surprisingly good. Thank Google. She stared at him for a second, watching the way his face relaxed without the tension of a crowd or the pressure of performance. Can I ask you something? You usually do. She leaned against the counter. Why did you really need to get married? Ethan glanced at her. I told you, stabilizing the company image. You don't strike me as someone who bends for image. He paused, then said, My father was old money, legacy, tradition, the whole thing. When he died, I inherited the business, but not the board's trust. They think I'm too modern, too unpredictable. A stable marriage gives the illusion of discipline, of roots. And the woman you were supposed to marry? He looked away. She was convenient, familiar. We had an agreement. But she left when she realized she wasn't the only one trying to control the narrative. Ruby nodded slowly. You don't like losing control, do you? Ethan looked at her. No, do you? I don't like being used. Silence passed between them. Later that week, Ruby received a call from her sister in Ohio. Their father had been hospitalized again, and the bills were stacking up. Without thinking, Ruby booked a flight and packed a bag. When Ethan returned that evening and found her at the door with her suitcase, he frowned. Where are you going? My dad is sick. I need to go. He stared at her for a beat. You should have told me. I would have arranged something. She shook her head. It's personal. Ruby, everything about your life is public now. If you disappear, people will notice. Let them. You think the press will be kind? I don't care about the press, Ethan. I care about my father. He exhaled. Take my plane. I don't want your money. It's not about money. It's about time. My jet gets you there in 2 hours instead of 6. She looked at him, trying to read his expression. Why are you being nice to me? He paused, then said quietly, Because I don't like how this feels either. She didn't reply. She just nodded and left. 3 days passed. Ethan didn't call. Ruby didn't message. But on the 4th morning, a delivery arrived at the hospital, a tray of food from a local diner her father used to love. A card that read, You mentioned he liked apple pie. It wasn't signed, but she knew who it was from. She returned to the penthouse that evening. Ethan was in the living room, laptop on his knees, eyes focused. She dropped her bag and stood silently until he looked up. How's your dad? Stable. He nodded. She walked over and sat beside him. Thank you for the pie. He said nothing, just looked at her. She leaned back. Do you miss being alone? Sometimes, but not as much as I thought I would. They didn't speak for a while, but then without asking, he took her hand, and didn't let go. 2 weeks later, just when Ruby thought she had found a rhythm in this strange new life, everything unraveled. It started with a phone call at 7 a.m. Ethan was already dressed, tying his watch strap with his usual precision, when his phone buzzed. He answered with a clipped tone, his back turned to her. But the silence that followed the greeting caught Ruby's attention. What is it? She asked when he hung up. He didn't look at her. There's a problem. What kind of problem? Someone leaked our marriage agreement. Ruby's heart dropped. The piece of paper they had both signed in cold logic, stating the terms of their temporary arrangement, was never meant to see the light of day. It was supposed to protect them. Now it was weaponized. Within an hour, the media had picked up the story. Headlines exploded across every major platform. Fake wedding exposed. Ethan Carter's marriage, a corporate cover-up. Ruby Fields, opportunist or victim, paparazzi swarmed their building. The press turned Ruby into a villain, dissecting every detail of her past, her student debt, her social media posts, her parents' modest background. She became an overnight target. Ethan's company stocks dipped 5% in a single day, but it was the internal response that hit hardest. The board demanded an emergency meeting. When Ethan returned from the conference room, Ruby was waiting. She stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, eyes stormy. "Did you know this would happen?" "No," he said, removing his jacket, "but I should have prepared for it." She slammed a folder down on the counter. "This isn't just a PR crisis, Ethan. This is my life. I'm handling it." "No," she said, voice rising. "You're handling your company, not me, not this." Ethan froze. Then quietly, "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to stop acting like I'm just another asset you forgot to insure." Silence settled between them. He stepped forward, face unreadable. "I never saw you that way." Ruby looked at him, eyes burning. "Then why did you let everyone else think it?" The next day, things got worse. Someone released a video, grainy but clear enough. It showed Ethan handing Ruby the marriage agreement on their second day together, with the words, "We'll file for annulment quietly after a few months." There was no context, no explanation, just 30 seconds of footage that painted her like a contract bride. That night, Ruby couldn't sleep. She sat on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, staring out over the city. The cold air stung her cheeks, but she didn't go inside. Ethan joined her a little after midnight. He handed her a mug of tea. She didn't look at him. "Say it," she said quietly. "Say this was a mistake." He sat beside her. "No." Ruby glanced at him. "Then what was it?" Ethan took a long breath. "At first it was a solution. Then it became a habit. Then I started forgetting it wasn't real." Her throat tightened. "Don't say that." "Why not?" "Because if you admit it, I won't be able to keep pretending it was just a performance." He looked at her then. Really looked. "I haven't been pretending, Ruby. Not for a while now." She set the mug down. "I can't stay here." He reached for her hand. She pulled it away. "I need space," she said. "Before I forget who I was before all this." Ethan nodded slowly. "I'll have the car ready in the morning." She packed quietly the next day. No shouting, no dramatic goodbye, just a quiet click of a suitcase and the sound of a woman choosing herself for once. He didn't stop her, and that hurt more than anything else. Ruby didn't go far. She rented a quiet apartment above a bookstore in Brooklyn and spent her days helping out the owner, a kind, older woman named Gloria, who didn't ask too many questions. For the first time in months, Ruby had no cameras in her face, no reporters outside her door, and no cold contract to follow. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. She tried to convince herself she was fine. She cooked, she read, she organized shelves alphabetically, and still, she caught herself thinking of Ethan when the streetlights flickered on, when she poured coffee into her avocado mug, or when she passed by any bakery that sold apple pie. He didn't call, he didn't show up. She told herself that meant he'd moved on, that it was better this way. But late at night, her phone buzzed with news updates. Carter Technologies slowly regained its stock value. The media frenzy faded. People moved on to the next scandal. Her name vanished from headlines, except for one quiet headline buried deep in a tech blog. CEO withdraws from board vote to pursue extended leave. The article was short, no quotes, no details, but Ruby knew. He had walked away, not for damage control, for her. The thought made her breath catch in her chest. One evening, as she was closing up the store, Gloria approached her with a strange smile. "You have a visitor," she said, then winked. Ruby stepped out from behind the counter, and there he was. Ethan. No suit, no tie, just a black sweater and jeans, hands in his pockets, face calm, but his eyes, they were not the eyes of a man with a plan. They were the eyes of someone who had finally stopped pretending. She didn't speak. He didn't either. They just stood there surrounded by rows of second-hand books, and the smell of paper and coffee grounds. Finally, he said, "I didn't want to ruin your peace." "You already did," she replied, a soft laugh escaping, "and then you made me miss it." He stepped closer. "I thought giving you space meant staying away. But space without a reason to come back, it just becomes distance." Ruby looked down. "Why are you here, Ethan?" He pulled something from his coat pocket and handed it to her. It was a copy of their wedding photo. The real one. Not the staged version from the gala. It was taken by a photographer's assistant, a candid shot of her laughing, eyes closed, and Ethan looking at her with something dangerously close to wonder. "I kept this," he said, "not because it looked good in a press kit, but because it was the first time I realized I didn't want this to be temporary." Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the photo. "I don't have a ring anymore," she said quietly. "I don't care about the ring." "Then what do you care about?" "You," he said. "You made my life make sense in a way no merger ever could. You made me human again." She looked up at him, eyes soft. "You were never the problem, Ethan. You were just afraid to let someone in." "I'm not afraid now." Silence. Then she stepped forward, slowly. "And if I let you in," she asked, "what happens when it gets messy again?" "Then we clean it up together." She laughed softly. "You're really bad at speeches. I didn't rehearse." "Good," she said, "because I don't want another performance." He reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. They stood there for a moment, in the middle of a quiet bookstore, holding each other like the world outside didn't matter, because for once, it didn't. 3 months later, Ruby stood barefoot in the kitchen of their Brooklyn apartment, stirring coffee with a wooden spoon, wearing one of Ethan's old sweatshirts that hung off her shoulders like a blanket. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. Inside, warmth settled over everything. Ethan walked in, hair still damp from the shower, holding a half-written notebook in one hand and an expression that only softened when he looked at her. "You're up early," he said. "I never went to sleep." "Couldn't?" She shrugged. "Too many thoughts." He crossed the room and stood behind her, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Want to tell me?" She smiled. "I was thinking about how a wrong turn, a misplaced invitation, and a borrowed dress turned into this. This? You and me, whatever we are now." He kissed her temple gently. "We're real. That's all that matters." She turned to face him. "Do you regret it?" "No," he said. "Do you?" "Not even a little." Later that day, they visited the courthouse, not for an annulment, but for a new marriage license. This time, no contracts, no cameras, no boardrooms, just 2 people who had chosen each other for no one else's benefit, but their own. Ethan held her hand through the entire process. Afterward, they walked down the courthouse steps into the sunlight, and he turned to her. "No more pretending," he said. She looked up at him with a grin. "I think we're past that." And then he kissed her. Not like a scene from a play, not like something carefully timed and posed. He kissed her like a man who had waited too long to find something real. And Ruby kissed him back like she had never planned to be chosen. But now that she was, she would never let it go. Sometimes the best beginnings come dressed as accidents, but the truest endings are always the ones we choose.